everybody. I'm Catherine, I know most of you. So I was part of the group of people that started the WILD group in Denver, and I just want to acknowledge the board that did a lot of work to get everybody here. You all stand up. Thank you for all your hard work. It's a lot of work to put on these events, and we really appreciate Emmy and Joy for letting us use their space and then donating food and beverages. So WILD's mission is to provide, I'm going to read it so it's correct, women in lighting and design an inclusive and an open environment for professional and personal growth by offering community membership and knowledge. So we brought in our lovely panel tonight to hopefully answer any and all questions, and we really appreciate you guys for sharing your time and your knowledge. So thank you.
Hi guys, my name is Lauren. I'm with Visual Interest. So I'm part of the WILD board in Denver, and Catherine and Rachel Fitzgerald, you might know her as well, they brought WILD chapter to Denver in 2017. A couple of you attended those events. We were kind of winging it and decided in 2018 we'd make it a little bit more official. So far I think it's kind of working. We've got an RSVP, we've got name tags, so you're here. And we're hoping to really give you a community and safe space to be supported with other women in your industry, even if you are a competitor during the day. So it's kind of a place where we can all come together. We have a very diverse board here to kind of kick that off. So I'd like each of you to just quickly introduce yourself and who you're with.
Hi, my name is Bev Dahl, and I'm with Barnlight Electric out of Titusville, Florida, but I'm from San Diego.
Hi, I'm Teal Brogdon with Horton-Lees Brogdon Lighting Design, and I studied architectural engineering a long, long, long time ago. And lighting was, I guess the light went off, right? So it was so much better than everything else, and I sort of stumbled into it and haven't looked back, and it's been a great ride.
Hi, I'm Crystal Mackin with Heffern Partnership Lighting Design in Boulder. Like Teal, I studied architecture, not engineering though. I studied architecture and found lighting in museums in Paris actually. And yeah, I never looked back.
Hi everybody, I'm Lisa Bartlett with Davis Partnership Architects. I lead our lighting studio there, and like these ladies have an education. Mine is in interior design, but I practiced interior design and architecture and am licensed in both of those. But about 10 years ago I pivoted into lighting design and have really found a wonderful home. I'm very thrilled to do that, and also very honored to be with these lovely, lovely, talented ladies.
I'm Jamie Lacasse, and I work for MH, and I was in architecture and interiors, and I went on to lighting sales, which I have loved and have met all of you, so thank you so much.
I'm Sandra Vasquez. I am a senior instructor at the University of Colorado, and I got to lighting by accident, and now I teach. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you, ladies. That works. So as you can see, we have a very diverse crowd here, and we're excited to get this panel started. And go ahead and see what they have to say about a few things. Maureen, you want to start us off?
And you're welcome to get more food and wine during this. Okay, first question. We work in a creative industry where it is our job to create on the spot with demanding timelines, though this is not always possible. Teal, where do you find inspiration outside of your workplace?
Thanks, it's such a great question, right? And I think we all find that sometimes we're noodling on a really challenging problem, and we may want to be able to solve it right away as we sit with our team, but sometimes that answer comes at really unexpected times. I would say the places that I find those answers that sort of bubble up to things that have been really challenging are when I see a performance. So I really enjoy dance. I love the fluidity of it, and lighting is a big part of dance, and so I see that as much as I possibly can, and I find solutions coming to mind or new ideas. The other place that I find inspiration is in Mother Nature. So I spend a lot of time outdoors, hiking, exploring, being inspired. I was just going through my phone, and I can't believe how many sunsets I've photographed. There's like a huge file of them. So I think, that sort of origination of where we find ourselves grounded and appreciating the beauty around us helps us sort of let down the barriers to maybe some obvious solutions that have been there all along.
Thank you. And Jamie?
I find my inspiration mostly from the outdoors. That's what I really love to do. So, and I'm like Teal. Often I'll float a problem in my head for a long time. And I find like if I'm walking or I take a shower, sometimes those are when I find my biggest inspirations. Like if I sit at my desk and I sit there and I think, oh God, I figured this out today, and I have 20 minutes to do it, then I kind of seize up. So if I go out for a walk, or I go fish, or I'm with my family, or I'm taking a shower, things kind of seem to come to me. I love the outdoors. I think the outdoors kind of frees yourself. So the minute I step out of the office to outside, I feel like I can think again. Usually, sometimes in the office there's just too much static and too much stuff going on. So I do better away from it. That answers your question.
So yeah, we'd also like to know if you others where your creative peak time is.
My creative peak time is very, very early in the morning. I'm one of those people that can get up at 5, and it's probably annoying because I'm already happy. But I find in our industry, and because of all of the input we have coming at us all the time, we always have to find that time to be creative. So sometimes it's when I'm at the gym and I'm sitting on the recumbent and writing, and that's like a really good time for silence and to open up my phone and do things. So that's where I find my creative time.
Well, I don't have a specific time when I find I'm most creative, but I listen to a lot of podcasts when I'm walking. In fact, I don't know if any of you listen to Tim Ferriss. Does anyone listen to Tim Ferriss? Oh yeah, okay, you need to jot this name down. 2 R's, 2 S's. Believe me, he's easy on the eyes. That's a good place to start. But the diversity of knowledge that he shares sparks so many different ways of thinking and approaching problems. He has really found ways to break down tasks so that one can increase performance in a reduced amount of time across any task. And I love that. But one of the other things that he talks about a lot, and that I imagine we all struggle with, is flow. Do you guys sometimes feel like you have a hard time getting enough concentration or solitude to be able to move into a flow state? Is that a challenge for anyone? We have an open office, and I think it's a real challenge, and it's a challenge the more and more we're present with electronic devices, because we're always multitasking. Creativity and flow take at least 20 minutes for us to get into that state. So rather than, for me, it being about a specific time of day, it's more about carving out the opportunity to be able to move into flow state, which means uninterrupted time, oftentimes for me in solitude, to be able to generate creative solutions, because it takes a while to allow ideas to germinate. And I imagine that's why you talk about taking a walk or being outdoors as times that stimulate you. So that's really what it comes down to for me.
So my response is going to be more pedagogically inclined because of my line of work. And one of the things that I have learned, whether it is creativity or just simply doing our normal work, from the point of view of learning, we need time. Time is our best friend. And so what the ladies here are indicating is the solitude and the time to be able to think, but also synthesis requires more than 20 minutes. It requires days, right? So starting, or if you have the luxury of starting to think about the problem ahead of time, even if you don't do anything with it, your brain, the 90% of the brain that we don't use, will be working for us, right? And I think that that's really important for not only learning, but for creativity. Because our schedules are so busy, my peak time is actually in the morning, but I do try to practice this principle by giving my brain a head start. And so I always think of my classes and prepare my classes at night to let my brain rest with that knowledge, and the brain is doing the work for me. And in the morning, I can easily catch things that I'm missing, mistakes, and I can recall a lot of the things that I need to say in class. So time is our best friend.
Thank you, ladies. This brings us to our next question. While it is clearly a place where we can all come together and get inspiration from one another, we're offering community mentorship and knowledge sharing. So we'd like to know if any of you have had a professional mentor in your lighting career. I think we have some really interesting answers to come. I'm going to start with you, Sandra, since you are in a teaching environment. Crystal will come to you next, since you are in an ownership environment.
I think I misunderstood the question.
So have you had a mentor?
I had a mentor.
Yes.
Absolutely. I had a mentor. I have had several mentors, but the mentors that made the most impact in my life were at the Lighting Research Center. And they were all male. And they, when we get to another question where I can explain a little bit better what I mean, they basically helped me remove myself out of the way, to be myself, right? I was too insecure. I am still insecure, but I'm less so, right? And they helped me really think about taking myself out of the situation and consider just the ideas, for the merit of the ideas. And it's so liberating. It's very liberating when you're not overthinking that your idea is silly, that they're thinking that you're dumb, right? And so that was really important to me.
Thank you. And Crystal?
I did not have a formal mentor. My first boss, Francis Cray, was a bit of a mentor, definitely, in design, and he was such a creative designer, and how to run an office maybe, and in some ways how not to, maybe. And then my partner and husband, Steve, has also been a mentor because of just the knowledge he has in his niche of lighting. Anna Leo was a bit of a mentor, and she is, I think now with Zoontobel, she started IO, and I went to school with her. She was like a TA when I was at Illinois, and I kind of wish I'd made more of an effort to make her a real mentor, to really pick her brain about being an entrepreneur, and not so much on design, but like, you know, good practice and having your own company. And to have a mentor that's a woman, I think is important. So I would recommend to all of you out there, especially the younger ones, that it could be really helpful to have a mentor and a woman mentor, because we struggle with the work-life balance more than the men, I think.
Thank you. And Lisa?
I have had mentors. Interestingly enough, in my career practicing interior design and architecture, I felt very alone. I was on the Western Slope. I was acting as an architect, and I would go to job sites and be completely ignored by the men when I was the project architect, or I would be grilled in a really humiliating fashion by contractors at pre-bid meetings with, with 30 men. I was the only woman and the youngest person in the room by half. And there really wasn't anybody in my environment that I felt like I could turn to. It wasn't until I shifted into doing lighting design that I realized I can either go back and get a master's in lighting, which would have been a very valid path, or look, I just can jump right in. And I was blessed to find an older gentleman where I lived in Portland, Maine, Jim Stockman. He came from the world of theater, he was from Brooklyn, and he was everything you would expect. What do you want from me? He was amazing, is amazing. And I have notes, I have a notepad this thick with everything he gave forth about lighting. And I was so appreciative of the faith that he placed in me. He taught me so much about the technical world of lighting. And to this day, I still seek out mentorship. There's a gentleman in Fort Collins who used to practice lighting in Southern California named Alan LeBeau. And I've asked him to be my mentor just so I have someone off whom I can bounce ideas and solicit other avenues of input. So I completely agree. Asking for a mentor, seeking out a mentor, it doesn't matter how experienced you are. Mentor up, mentor down, mentor laterally, challenge each other, and seek out input. My team is incredible, and I love it when they bring ideas or teach me something that I don't know. So I don't think we have to limit ourselves to the idea of a formal mentor, and yet I also encourage that. I think it's really valuable.
Thank you, Lisa. That actually is going to lead me to ask you, are you currently mentoring anyone?
I am. I actually had the most extraordinary conversation with one of our senior architects several nights ago who had struggled with some respect issues on a job site and really needed some guidance. And it's really valuable. I think it's really affirming. I don't know if you ladies feel this way, but to be able to share some of the trials and the things that we've been through. And I think we stand on the shoulders of the women who are in their 60s who have suffered and endured such an extraordinary amount of, I'm sorry, it really brings me to tears, some of the stories I've heard. We owe so much to the women who are, 10, 20 years older than we are, that the things that we experience are so minor by comparison. But for me to share with not only men, but with women, the hard times I've been through, with the hope that it helps them find a way to negotiate a circumstance with less pain than I've been through, to me is so affirming. And I feel like it's all of our responsibilities, that we don't just do what we do from an artistic and a technical standpoint. We're called upon to share our professional and our business knowledge to help those around us advance, whether they're men or they're women. And I'm honored to do that with a number of different people, men, women, younger than I am, older than I am, architects, interior designers, and lighting designers.
Thank you, Lisa.
Okay, I broke the crying barrier.
Thank you. And Tia, what about you? Are you currently mentoring anyone?
Well, I just want to riff on the crying barrier. I was not too long ago, but then I'll get to that question. I was not too long ago at one of those trainings you have to go to when you go to a construction site before you get your sticker and you can go on the site. And they have the video that shows the guy who didn't stop the other guy who got killed. And I'm sitting there with all these, beefy contractor guys, and I'm like tearing up. But I think, I think what's at the heart of it is part of what makes us great, I think, collaborators, is that all of us are listeners, right? And we sort of feel and engage with the people we're collaborating with. And because of that, I think it makes us strong designers and collaborators. So, mentors that I learn from, actually, whenever I go to a meeting, I sort of listen to and really watch what's going on in the meeting. And there might be an amazing mechanical engineer who can walk through a really dry topic and get everybody pulled through it in a really interesting way. And so I'm sort of constantly learning from people around me. But remind me of the question again.
Well, that actually answered the next question I was going to ask, if you are being mentored or if you have a mentor in your career, but also are you mentoring anyone currently or in the past?
So I think one of the great areas of satisfaction with regard to collaboration, and I think all of us have had the opportunity to, Sandra, to mentor a group of students, and you sort of fall in love with that group of students, and then they eventually move on. And I think all of us in teams, whatever way we're in. So I think everyone in my office I'm happily engaged with in a mentorship and also learning from them. So it's a great joy, actually, that process of working with other people, learning from them, and helping to, and hopefully teach them and we inspire each other.
Awesome. I'll throw one more question at you, actually. What other resources do you encourage women to use for professional development?
Well, you know, I think that you may find that you're technically minded. Go out there and make sure you are continuing to learn and challenge yourself. You may find that you are a sketcher, continue to improve those skills. So I think on the one hand, those resources are to continue to be engaged in your profession, volunteer, go to events, but also follow your passion, because then it doesn't feel like work. It feels like an extension of the joy of what you do.
Thank you. Bev, I'm going to come at you with this as well. I'm going to answer one question for you. You actually have mentored someone. That's me, whether you know it or not, or like it or not. Thank you. So I'm wondering if you've had a mentor and what other resources you use for professional development to other women. Up to you, either part, both parts.
Well, as far as a mentor, hello, is it working? Okay. I've had several, and because I started a little different in lighting, I started as I was a landscape designer. So when I was designing landscapes and people would go to Home Depot and want to put the lights on this beautiful piece of granite that I picked, I wanted to pull my hair out. So I first started a little different path. I was with a distributor, actually a national account distributor that does a lot of specification. And this gentleman is one of my mentors. So we all have several mentors in our life. I don't think there's only one. And it needs to be like a friendship, because it's going to be a flow. It's got to be someone that you can go to with everything, even the emotional things that we are not allowed to bring to work, especially as women. So, but my number one mentor in my life is my mother, because when I was 12, she said, you will be educated and you will stand on your own 2 feet and be able to support yourself. And that is what all you girls can do. So, that's it. Yeah.
Thank you. And other sources that you pull for professional development or personal development?
I believe in continuing education. I believe that you need to keep the sword very sharp. Reading books, TED Talks, speaking among yourselves. Don't be afraid to broach a subject that you know nothing about, and read. So I've brought some of my favorite books here that I want to donate to the cause. I think we should start a library. I think there should be a place where people can go. Like this book, every woman in this room needs to read this book. It's called Lead In by Sheryl Sandberg. And we'll get to that subject, but I think that's part of the whole process here. You know, we're not drawing a line in the sand. We need to teach, because we're really good at that. So, and there's one other great book. This is called The Art of War. First book I ever read out of college. When you watch, I watch a lot of news, and you'll see politicians always have this book with them, because they go, you want to know how a man thinks? Read this book. That's enough for me.
We'll get a library system going shortly. Awesome. We'll go back to you real quick, Teal. Wondering what you think constitutes a diverse and supportive firm.
Well, I think that firms come in all sizes, and we've been very fortunate to have, I think, really a process of understanding that lighting design is a passion that we have, but if we really want to be great at what we do, we need to be serious about the business of what we do as well, because it sort of elevates and enables the tools that you need and a healthy work environment, etc. And I think when those fundamentals are really addressed and you understand that your profession and your practice stands on great design, but also responsible management of the design process so that you have the financial resources to have all of those things that let you do even more great design. Once you get that sort of underneath you, then you turn to the people. So it's a great, and no mistake, I'm sure, that question follows on the question of mentorship. So I think really the supportive environment is taking the process from mentorship into sponsorship. So we've gotten to the point where we've sort of learned that people need to know that they're supported, but also to have somebody sort of cheering for them as they're progressing through their career. We have a young lady who's moving to our New York office, and I can't tell you how many times I've told her how excited I am for all the things she's going to learn beyond lighting design in a new environment, and the fact that she's pushing herself into a new frontier, whatever office she might be heading to. And it's that really excitement and cheering, and I've got your back, and I'm looking out for you, that I think is really what we thrive with in our work environments.
And Jamie?
I wrote down on my list, guys, trust. I think trust in an office or an environment is the most important thing. I've worked in environments that have been wonderful, and everyone supports one another and bolsters everyone up, and no one's an expert, and everybody has something they're really good at, and they work together as a team. I think, and it's kind of what Teal was saying, I think when you have an office that doesn't have trust, and you don't quite know if everyone has one another's back, or, you know, even it goes with family too. Like if you need to run home and do something for your kids, that you know that they understand that because you work really hard, that if you need to go, that's the most important thing, and that you can re-enter and everything's fine. But I've worked in both environments where trust has been tremendous, and the power of the office is just, teamwork is just amazing what you can accomplish versus the other. So I think trust is really the most important thing. So.
And Sandra?
So one of the things that I wrote on my answer was supported firms reciprocates in kind what it takes from you, right? Because in what I mean is that, yes, we think of salary and we think of we're getting paid for what we do, but there's so many intangibles that we give that are not recognized or that are not supported. And one of them is growth in my mind, and I'm not saying just promotion. I am talking about this notion of being able to be challenged, be able to take risks, and the firm being able to support that regardless of the outcome. And of course, a firm cannot do that all the time, but surely in our lifetime in that company, there should be an ability for us to take a risk that would allow us to go to the next step on our own, right? And I think that that's really important.
Thank you. Communication can be an issue for anyone, particularly young professionals and women. What communication skills do you utilize that facilitate success? Lisa?
I think back to a drama class that I had I think I was a sophomore in high school, and I was acting out the role of a young woman, and my drama teacher really got on my case because he said that my voice was too high-pitched. Lower the pitch of your voice, lower the pitch of your voice. And there are a lot of things that I could say about communication skills, and I'll say a few more, but one thing that I don't think that we consider very often is how tone of voice and pitching of the voice, I'm a singer as well, and so I love that, I pay a lot of attention to it, but the impact that it has on people. So in a very kind of low-level, tangible way, I would encourage you to start listening to the people that you love to listen to and analyze their tone of voice. Analyze the way that their voice lilts up and down through sentences, whether they end a sentence on an up or they end it down. How does that affect you? And then compare that with the way that you speak and see if you can derive any knowledge there. That's something that I don't think people talk about, but it's really powerful. On the less tangible side, I would say that the book Nonviolent Communication has been really, really helpful. My coach had me read that. It's the first thing he had me read, and that was extremely hard for me. That book is all about listening and unwinding from somebody else, really engaging and understanding their point of view and reflecting it back to them. And that's hard when we're in a professional environment where we want to be heard and we feel like we have the right solution and we have great intentions and we want to talk about all the reasons why our solutions are great. And many times it's far more effective to spend the time to reflect back to your client, your colleague, your boss, what it is that they're saying to you, so you make sure you understand their point of view, and even more importantly, they feel heard, because all discussions after that point are much more smooth. You've gotten all the static out of the air. So those would be my two biggest tips on communication.
What about communicating your issues inside the workplace, particularly salary?
Is this Steve?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, I'll keep talking, great. Right back to nonviolent communication, going back and making sure that you're hearing somebody else's point of view. It's actually saved me from some gaffes. I've made plenty of gaffes, but when I've actually stopped to ask somebody, hey, tell me about this, tell me why you did this, it saves me from just getting all on somebody's case based on my assumptions. I learn a lot more about where they're coming from. The other thing I would say in the workplace is that we are in an environment that historically, and I think it's amazing the shift that's happening culturally right now with Me Too, but historically we've had to fight very, very hard for equitable salary. And the biggest thing I've learned over the years, and I learned this in a very hard way in my 20s, practicing interior design in a firm where I was extremely underpaid, was lead with data. Not an emotional case. You need to know the comparable salaries of your peers in your marketplace for the work you're doing. You need data. And it should not be an emotional appeal. Well, I wish I'd like to make more money. I'm worth more money. Those things are certainly true, but when you have the conversation about salary, lead with data, very factual, no emotion, much higher success. Our firm places great value on looking at equity of pay, and I imagine there are many firms represented here where that is really looked at. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily the norm. You have to be your own greatest advocate. So be firm, don't be afraid to ask. Learning to negotiate is incredibly important, and I would also, if I can recommend one more podcast, I know I'm totally over-talking my 2 minutes, so I'm sorry. But as podcasts go, I listen to a series called Slate's Negotiating Academy, just S-L-A-T-E. I've probably got that a little bit wrong. But the biggest thing out of the gates at the front of that was the person who puts the number on the table first is in a far more powerful position for negotiating than someone who says, well, what do you think? Or letting the other person lead. And that totally upended all of my beliefs about the way one should do negotiating. And there was a lot more in that podcast, but I think understanding the rules of negotiation, like Bev brought the art of war, that's really important and will help you as you're talking about salary in the workplace.
Thank you. Crystal? Will you repeat the first question?
Yes.
So what communication skills do you utilize that facilitate success?
Well, I like to communicate through pictures more than words. So I really had to learn to to talk in front of groups of people like this too, and especially in a big meeting room with all men and I'm the only woman. I think what's helped me is to just be very direct and honest and open, and that has been successful for me. The other thing is, and especially, I mean, I've always, like I said, talked through pictures, so all of our presentation materials are very clear and graphic, and really that's how I get designs, communicated to people. Mock-ups, full-scale mock-ups, fixture samples. We try and bring a fixture sample for almost every fixture we're using on a project, and that really helps. And so I actually don't have to talk so much. I have a lot of props.
What about communicating your issues inside the workplace? Salary.
So, and salary, yeah. Actually,
Or any other issues?
I do have a story about salary, but it might apply better to a later question. But I guess communicating in the workplace, I've only worked in 2 offices. One was for 3 years in California, and then the other one is with Steve for over 20 years. So I'd say for me, communicating in the workplace, it's a little tricky because we have a personal.
I'm not sure everyone actually knows that you're married.
Yeah, well, okay, so Steve Heffernan and I are married, and we've been married for, what, 20 years? Almost as long as the company was formed. So if any of you ever find that you're working with your husband's your boss, or you're your husband's boss, I would actually recommend marriage counseling. Steve and I did great, and we didn't actually have a marriage counselor, and it probably would have helped. It probably would have helped with communication, but yeah.
Thank you. And Jamie, what communication skills do you utilize that facilitate success?
I have a different way of communicating as I've gotten older, and I can't remember how I communicated when I was younger. As you get older, like everyone said, all these tools you have. I got so tired of people, men and contractors, telling me that I couldn't do things, that I was taught very, very quietly, very ladylike, always important to be a lady, most importantly, of all things. You're a lady and act like a lady, regardless of what is going on. But I would repeat the thing that I wanted over and over again until I would break them down. They would say, we can't do that, and I'd say, I'm sorry. I'd act like I wasn't very smart. I don't understand. Can you please explain to me one more time why we can't do this? And that has been my hugest tool. That's what I do. I'm not proud of it, but it works.
So what about communicating your issues inside the workplace?
Kind of the same thing. I have gotten tired of skirting around issues, so I just, you should never have to apologize if you're being honest, and you're doing it with the best of integrity and ethics in mind. So there should be nothing that you should not be able to go in and say, in my humble opinion. So if you think that you're being underpaid, you need to go in, but I agree with Lisa. The thing that has helped me is, here's why I need to be paid more money. It's because this, and this. You have to have statistics, and you have to have backup with it. But there's no reason why you can't go in. If you feel that way, you should have no problem voicing that. I mean, I really think it's important. Don't feel that you can't say, but have some backup,
So data, manners, or break them down or marry.
Right, new question. How can we achieve work-life balance? Does your company support this balance, or do you support that in your company? If so, how? Bev, we'll start with you.
So, work-life balance. It's the Achilles heel of being a woman, without a doubt. Because we always have to be alive in where we work. We have so much input coming in, constant communication. So my company supports it, but we have to master it. It's not for anybody else to master. You can't be a slave to your computers. You're the master. You can't be a slave to your inbox. You need to master it. So, and then, there's times when you have to take downtime. You're number one. And if you're not feeling well, and it's going to come out in your performance. So you have to take that time to be mindful of yourself so that all these things are managed properly. Okay. And I'll tell you, and then some of the ways I do, some of my balancing strategies are being in the moment. So be in the moment. Don't be texting while you're talking to somebody. Don't go out to dinner with a client and take out your phone. Listen, talk. It's the right thing to do. Your family's always first. Whatever family that is, they're always first. And take care of yourself. So that's really important. Really important. You're welcome.
I'm learning so much tonight. Thanks, everybody. And I hope we have some time to hear from the audience too, because I'm sure there's going to be some great stories told. Well, there's another book that I can recommend to everybody, and it's by Twyla Tharp, who's a dancer, and the book is called The Creative Habit. And Ms. Vasconez introduced me to that book, which is an amazing book. And I also then read The Collaborative Habit, which was a follow-up to it. But I think what's important on both of those is actually sort of setting boundaries. And I remember when I was in high school, my chemistry teacher made us schedule our entire week, like when we were going to study, when we were going to play, when we were going to, which I have to say I'm not quite that rigorous about it, but I've discovered that the idea of having habits and following those habits, and if you have habits that you don't like, then you think about the triggers that sort of send you along that pathway. So for me, I think that that work-life balance is about setting some boundaries or habits, and that you slip off of that path now and then, but you sort of bring yourself back around. And so if there are time triggers, or I'm going to do this for 20 minutes and set your boundaries and expectations, it can really set you up. And I think put yourself first and forgive yourself if you're not really perfect in your success at following through on all of those goals you set.
Well, when we started our firm, what was that, 25 years ago, there were 3 of us, and Steve and I weren't married yet, and Steve put out a questionnaire that we all answered, and it was a lot about work-life, like how do we want our firm to be? And we all wanted balance. All 3 of us really wanted balance. We didn't want to work 60 hours a week for more money. We wanted to work maybe 30 hours a week and have more work-life balance. So yeah, we kind of built our firm around that. And then when we did get married and had kids, I actually took an 8-year maternity leave. And I wasn't paid, well, I did our accounting during that time to kind of stay in the mix, but, and I don't remember if we had paid maternity leave, maybe we did, but, you know, I knew I had that job coming back. I could come back to it. And what else did I want to say? So we had our office in our home, and that doesn't work for everyone. You kind of have to figure out what works for you. It worked for us because we both are people that can set boundaries, and we weren't in the office all the time. That, you know, our office is at home. We could just walk in there anytime and keep working. Well, we set boundaries, and we did not do that. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Yeah, that was it. We created boundaries, and it was really, you know, the kids are older now, but it was great when they would just come home from the bus stop and stop in at the office and say hi to our interns or whoever else was working with us, and it was a very family kind of feeling, and our CU interns kind of felt like our family too, so that it was a good balance.
What maternity leave policy do you have in place for your company now? 8 years?
No. We don't really have one because it's just the two of us right now.
Okay.
And I'm not going to have any more.
And then Jamie, what kind of maternity leave policy do you have in place at your company? Not sure.
I don't know.
4 weeks.
4 weeks. Is it? I don't know.
I think so. I think it's 4 weeks. I already know what I'm saying. It's not
I
that good.
went there after I had the girls, probably 5 or 6
What about
years.
your, when you had them, where you were then?
I was in an architectural firm, which is one of the reasons I left architecture. Because I never knew how to do architecture and design without working 80 hours a week. So I always loved lighting, so I went to the other side. And I have loved that about my job, you guys, because I have flexibility, and I think with a family that's huge, but also creatively I found that it's also better for me as well too, because the pressure of having to have something done tomorrow that I just haven't had time to do or think about was really daunting. So I think you have to really, the thing I've learned as I've gotten older is just to be true to yourself, because nobody else is going to have your best interests at mind. You have to really be your own champion and handle it. And if you work hard, there should be no question about it. I mean, there's no short-term solution to anything. It's just hard work, right? So if you work hard and it's flexible, however you're doing it, then you'll be fine. I mean, I think that's what I've learned. I don't know.
Curious if anyone else on the panel or even in the audience has anything to add about maybe your really strong maternity leave policy or kind of what you're seeing now?
I would say don't base your work decision off of maternity leave, honestly. That's 12 weeks of your life. You find a way to save up and bridge that gap and move on. So that's what I would say. And find friends to help. It's a hard time.
I had kind of the opposite experience. So when I had my first son, the maternity leave policy was a small firm. The maternity leave policy was, well, we'll guarantee your job in 12 weeks. And the rest of it was kick you down and kick you and kick you again. And I didn't think much of it until I was having dinner with an old friend of my husband's who had a similar sized firm in the East Coast. And he said, those guys are jerks, you should leave. And I was like, oh, we're a small firm. And he was like, if they valued you, they would have helped you out.
I will say there is a testament to how they address that situation with potentially their view on work-life balance and or women and or whatever you want to say. There is a little bit of that, I would say, too. I had, with 2 kids, I had or go work for a manufacturer, work for a big company, if that's in your near future, because they are a little more stable in that realm. So I had one kid working for Philips where they're European, so it was like a no-brainer for them, duh. And then worked with a small company on the other where you had 2 weeks of pay and then come back, I don't know.
2 weeks of pay would be fantastic. I lost all my vacation, I paid $800 a month out of pocket for my health insurance, and then 0 pay for that entire time. So, I mean, all said and done, I only took 9 weeks and I lost, $10,000 to $12,000.
Right.
It was pretty
That was a
painful.
huge deal.
Yeah.
Huge deal.
So it was a lot, and it was a wake-up call, for sure.
But you're right, yeah, it's definitely an indication of their commitment to.
To you as a person,
As a
do they
person,
value
or-
you as an employee, or do they, and I think from my experience, I went into it thinking, these guys have families, so they understood it. But the reality is, they had wives who did everything for them. They worked 100 hours a week, their wives didn't care. So being a woman in that situation, it was not possible.
Thank you for your input, ladies. So coming kind of to one of the last sections of questions here. So it's no secret we work in a male-dominated industry. We've heard a little bit about what positive experiences that you've had in this industry. Any others to share? We'll start with you, Beth.
Well, thank you. Lots and lots of positive things, because it makes us stronger when we know how other people think. So some of the lessons are, the first lesson is game on, negotiate like a man. And we've already talked about this. And ladies, it is your job when you're in a negotiation to set the pace too. It's not for somebody else. If you know what your value is, that's where you negotiate it, and you do it with facts. You do it with return on investments. You can't go in with feelings, because it's their business, and it's their business, and you always have to remember that. So, equal pay, when you go in, you have to know what this job pays, and you have to be prepared to ask for that. That's what men do, and it's okay. Not for people to give you what they think, because it's a company again, and I worked for some very large conglomerates, and they're going to try to get the best at the less. And that's okay, it's not bad, but you have to be prepared for that. Never, never get emotional. This is the world of business. You save those emotions for when you go home to your husband or your wife or whoever it is. That's where your emotions are. You don't ever, or you walk outside of the building. You do not bring them in to the boardroom. And then back to contract negotiations, it falls right there too. Know the personalities that you're dealing with. Am I dealing with an A-type? You know who you're dealing with, because that's how you present your case. Critical thinking and self-motivation. Critical thinking is so important. That's a positive thing that I've acquired from working with men. Always stay on your toes. Read the books. Do the crossword puzzles. When you watch news, just don't watch the one channel that you want. You watch all the news. You need to know all the perspectives. And the last one is no more old boys club. It's now the girls and boys club. So there's not a line in the sand, because we're going to teach. We're going to teach men, because you know what? A lot of men are just as confused by this. Because this is not how they were raised, okay? We're all raised differently. When you're in kindergarten, they didn't ask the ladies who was going to be the first president. That question went to the men. So, they're taught to be aggressors. it's not a bad thing. A lot of men want this gap closed. So that's where our nurturing ability comes, where we can help that. So those are my points for positive.
And Jamie, what positive experiences have you learned from working in a male-dominated industry?
Oh, I've worked with some wonderful men, and I think the men that I've really enjoyed the most are the ones that, kind of what you said, there are no barriers. Like when you go in to meet with them, everyone has a solution to the problem or an idea, and it's valued for the idea itself, not that you're the one that's presenting the idea or the solution. I always find I can tell now as I'm getting older who is open to that and man-wise, and then there are also some that you can see as soon as you step in a room, they just shut down. And I don't know, I've tried to figure it out over the years, you guys. Is it men that have sisters or mothers that they're close to, or daughters? To me, it really comes down to personalities, and there's no one set that, I don't think I'm answering the question very well, but you have to know who, like Bev said, who you're working with. You have to know that person, and the best way to get what you think is beneficial for everyone. It should always be for the greater good and ethically and with integrity. And so that's my answer.
Are any of these lessons a little harder to learn or less predictable even in your career?
Oh, yeah. Like all of a sudden you'll think that something is going to go swimmingly, right? And it doesn't, because there's some thing that you've hit up against. And sometimes there are some really nice surprises that occur. But I think you have to, when you first meet people, you have to be open to them. You can't peg them right away. But you always have to remember too. I wrote something down on my sheet that if something doesn't go well at work, you need to be able to forgive and move on past it. But you need to, don't be stupid. Like you always need to remember kind of what happened, what that scenario was, so that if it happens again, you have an easier response to it. Because sometimes I think we recreate things that we've learned so much from that we don't need to go back and do that again. So I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. And Sandra, what positive lessons have you learned from working in a male-dominated industry?
So I'm going to go back to this notion of ideas and taking away emotion, and not only knowing how people are going to respond to your ideas, but this notion that you need to be comfortable with your own ideas. And that's something that I learned at the Lighting Research Center, because I was expected to provide ideas just as by supervisors and my bosses. And there was no more or greater satisfaction than feeling that I am a lowly graduate student, and yet I am in a room with the likes of Mark Ray, the equivalent of a David DeLaura, say, and they're asking me for my ideas. And they're treated as they're valuable. But I undermined it by me thinking, well, it's not a good idea, right? So one of the things that I learned is to separate that. Once the idea is out in the universe, it's no longer about me. It's about the idea. And once that you have the perspective, then that idea could be trashed, and it's okay. It's not going to hurt me, right? And so that's how you learn, because some ideas are great, some ideas are not, and that is okay. And so again, it was so much fun to be able to have very hefty, sometimes contentious meetings about ideas, and then an hour later we were at lunch just laughing and talking with my colleagues. And so I urge you to be able to make that separation in terms of what you do and who you are, and don't mix them. Right? That's important.
Was that one of the harder lessons that you learned, would you say, or is there something harder?
Oh, yeah, that was very hard.
Yeah.
Yes, that was very hard. And I need to continue reminding me that that's what I need to do. And it's partially a personality issue, the fact that being shy but that leads me, if I may, respond to the next question.
Absolutely, that's where we're leaving it.
That leads me to this notion of perfection, which is something that I think us women tend to highly value. I see it in my students. And it's so interesting that I have students, male students, who come to me to the class with a half-baked solution, but they present it with such confidence that they believe it, that is the best thing ever, and they manage to convince some of their peers that that is true. On the other hand, I have students, female students, that they have done their due diligence. It's very obvious that they've done their homework and they put thought through it. And the minute they present, they hesitate, they pause, and they justify. So I've been thinking about this, and it's like, what is it? And I've been able to kind of pair this word perfection, because when students come to my office and we start talking about this, the word perfection comes to mind. If it's not perfect, it's not good enough. I have not heard any male students come and talk about perfection. Ever. Right? And so, and one of the things that I learned from the LRC is that we should pursue excellence, which is very different than perfection. Because excellence is multifaceted, right? We can come at it from different angles. Perfection is one thing and one thing only, and if you don't meet that mark, then you're chasing your tail, and it steals our joy, and it makes us incompetent, really.
Thank you so much. Ladies, if you haven't already answered this, or if you even like to reiterate it, our final question is, what's the most valuable lesson that you learned overall working as a woman in lighting? Sandra, I think that was the answer you were giving just now. If you have anything to add, feel free. Go on ahead, Jamie. Most valuable.
It's always changing, which I think is what I love the most about it. It changes every day, every week. I think it would be horrible to be in an industry or a career path that it was the same thing every day. We can come in and out, we see projects, our work is on the computer, it's in our mind, it's by our hand, it's by our eye. Where some, I think we take for granted that there's some professions that they just analyze things all day long. So I think we're really lucky that we get to see all sorts of different facets of business. I love when you go meet a client and they have a program that's something that you don't know about, and you have to like delve into it and help them find the best solutions, because and you're constantly learning about new businesses. So I think that's really the funnest part of it. We get to really dig in and get our hands dirty, so to speak. Anyway, that's what I think.
I guess the biggest lesson I've learned is not specific to lighting design, but through the course of my career, and it's so, I've really loved everything that everybody said. I've felt so much resonance with that. But going back to what you were talking about in terms of perfection, the biggest and really most painful lesson that I learned was, again, working with my coach, and he did 360-degree feedback from people that I work with. People who supervise my work, people whom I directed, clients. And he came back to me and said, okay, are you ready for this? I was like, yeah, I think I'm ready, sort of biting my nails. And I really spent my entire life in every avenue feeling like if it's not perfect, I don't want to share it. If I'm going to a meeting with a client, I want to stay up all night to have every possible, every potentiality thought through and covered so I can go in and be perfect. And what he told me was that formality and drive for perfection was not only hanging me up, but was ruining my ability to connect with others, with clients, with colleagues. And the direction that he gave, the feedback that he gave was to stop worrying so much about being perfect and be authentic. There are going to be times you don't have all the answers, and that's great. And that has been the most vivifying lesson, and to let myself move into that has been utterly terrifying. I will admit it. Utterly terrifying. I'm almost in tears for the second time. But, you know, such a huge risk. And what I found is that when I've let myself be human in the workplace, and, you know, Brenda's here, we are cutting up and being ridiculous all the time. Our team, that's our hallmark. We are rabble-rousers. And yet there's so much creativity and so much joy and team problem solving that comes from being authentic and not being perfect. And challenging myself to let go of that and taking the risk has been like jumping off a cliff. It's been utterly terrifying and has been the most joyful shift in my entire career.
Most valuable lesson? I would say my most valuable lesson is, again, communicating. Learning to advocate for myself and to have a strong voice. So I guess that's kind of two things. But I think, I'm not sure we need to communicate like men to talk with men. I think we can actually communicate in our own style. We may be more quiet, we may be more gentle and softer, and I think that's okay. We just need to make sure we're heard. And for me, the way I've been heard is to just be, well, authentic is another way to say it. Honest, direct, open, authentic. And that has gained trust with my clients. When I gain trust with the clients, then, you know, I've got it. So that's been a really valuable lesson. And just a little story on speaking up. When I was a really young designer, like after 2 years out of college, I was in this big design meeting with Helmut Jahn and all these, you know, high-powered design people, and we were just, you know, charretting. We were putting out ideas. And I had an idea, and I didn't say anything. And like 15 minutes later, one of the big designers actually said my idea. And that was a big lesson. I should have said my idea. I don't know if it was because I didn't think it was perfect, but I was so young and just a girl. I felt like a girl. But I obviously had a valid idea, and I should have spoken up. And just a little note on the perfection thing. I love that we were talking about that, because I see that in my daughter and all of her girlfriends. And for a design profession, design is a process. And the first thing you put out there, it's not going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect because it's a process. So that may help to remember that.
Well, I have to say everything that everybody's saying is resonating so wonderfully. So again, I hope we get to hear from more of the room about some of these ideas as well. But I would say actually, in addition to all the wonderful things that have been discussed, I think listening is a skill that took me a little while to learn. And took me a while to understand the value of it, because sometimes if something's happened and you sort of, a client wants to do something and there's a pattern about what they want to do, you jump to a conclusion before really understanding what they need to do. And I've learned that there's a really great process to go through to really sort of dig up all the details. And funny enough, on the emotion side, I want to touch on the question of marriage counseling. Because our firm went through marriage counseling amongst the principals, and we were stuck. And we had to acknowledge and work through some pretty deep interpersonal stuff that when we worked through it blossomed into so much more joy for everybody. And so I think funny enough, one of the things when we get involved in a project, we often will say, what are the emotions we're trying to understand or create, or, you know, the vibe, the mission, the brand, whatever it is, or whatever word you put on it. And so I've learned to spend time sort of listening. And I find that sometimes when you're trying to find a solution, you sort of put out 2 or 3 things, and the one that's the right one sort of speaks to you, right? And it speaks to the client and so on. So I think that's a skill that I've learned can be really valuable in a group of people on a project, is really just listening. What does the client need? What does the project need? What is the architecture trying to say? All of that. And what are the emotions in the room, and how can I engage and help bring it to life? So.
Last. So, I kind of read the question a little bit different, though everything the ladies have said in the room, I absolutely endorse. And always make good decisions, ladies. Always make good decisions. But how I read it is also that one of the best things about lighting is that you guys have so many paths to go. You can be a designer, you can be a consultant, you can be an architect. The sky is literally the limit. And every single one of these positions you build, you get that legacy knowledge, that tribal knowledge, and you become better at what you do. So that's how I took the question as, this is a fabulous field. I mean, any young lady I talk to who doesn't know where she wants to go, I'm like, you need to look into lighting. Because it uses both sides of our brains, right and left. It's aesthetics, it's science, it's all those great things. So I wish I had found it earlier.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Thank you all, ladies. So we are going to open up to Q&A, as Teal mentioned, and a couple of you as well, even with the books. Our next event is April 19th, and we are going to make that more of a discussion, maybe a little bit of a book club. That event is definitely being fleshed out a little bit, but you'll hear about the details very soon. They really teed it up for us tonight. So I'll open it up to a Q&A discussion. Maybe we'll hold that for April 19th. So any questions in the audience? Miranda will come to you. You answered everything perfectly.
No, I just had another book to add to your list. There's one called Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office. And it kind of has to do with what Jamie was saying, where as women, as girls, we're taught be nice, right? And so it kind of has to do with what's ingrained in us from when we were babies, and what is carrying through, and what are we doing in our professions that maybe men are kind of going, huh? You know, so that's just another one to add to your list.
Good. No, I think we should have a list.
You have to read all these by April.
Book club.
Great. Any others?
I don't know. I kind of thought this was going to be more of a question, but it didn't end up being one, so I'm going to ask it. Maybe one or two can speak to, not like personal situations or stories or anything like that, but just like how the Me Too movement and what's going on with that, if that's kind of stricken any chords or like made you think about things differently, or just like a view, like some sort of like perception on it, and how that's affected you would be interesting.
About this question, when I was thinking, I was going through the list. I haven't thought about this story forever. But when I first got out of college, I worked for this developer. My first job out of college, it was like for 5 months, and she would always have money problems. And she would send me to her husband's office, he was an attorney, to pick up a check so that she could pay everyone's salary. So it was my day to go. I went, I had my little pantyhose on and a skirt. He drank in his office and he asked me if my pantyhose went all the way up. And I haven't thought about this story for a really long time. And I stood there and I looked at him, and he had daughters my age, and I said, would you ask your daughter a question like that? And then I went back to the office, and then the wife asked me if I had picked up the check, and I said, no. And she never asked me why. It was the funniest thing. But I was thinking, I'm sorry I had to steal this. I had to share it because when I saw that on the list, I was like, oh, I had forgotten all about that. And yeah. But I think everybody does. I mean, everybody has to have those stories of really weird things that happen, right?
How do you recommend dealing with it? How do you
I had this experience, like many of us, too many times. And a lot of the times I was like, I was younger, I was like, oh, that's okay. I just won't ever go out to drinks with this person again. Oh no, that person really didn't mean to put their tongue on my face. Like next time I'm just gonna twist it out. But then it happened to me as an older woman who's married. And I said, no more. Because I'm a strong lady. And if this person was doing this to me, who else? So after all the years of saying, look, and then I felt guilty because I never brought it to the attention. So I did bring it to the attention of the firm, and it was handled. But my lesson to everybody is, when something like this happens, immediately you look somebody in the eyes and you tell them no, and you document it. And then you go to the proper people in the company and you make sure that they know. Do not hide this, do not try to handle it yourself, because a creep is always going to be a creep. And so, because the firm might not know, people don't always know, don't assume, and it's not all. And there's women that are probably just like that man. So, it just so happens, that it's happening. So it's, don't let it slip. Call that person right there on the mark, and then go forward and make it to the right channels. Don't talk about it with people. Don't be a gossip, but handle it like a pro.
I have to say, I think a lot of times when something like that happens, it's shocking.
It's shocking.
And you're so shocked you're just like, and you see
so
that.
shocking.
But the thing is, he will do that to someone else.
He's already done it to somebody
Yes.
else.
Yes. So don't be afraid to say something.
Do not.
And I would actually say, we sometimes in our firm, on various topics that are difficult, we role play, we practice. So, there's nothing wrong with getting together with a colleague and sharing, if this happens, what do you do? If that happens, sort of get used to it, get prepared for it. We recently had a client who was abusive in shaming somebody by what their answer was on a conference call. And my employee came to me and said, I feel horrible and this isn't right. And hooray, and it doesn't matter man or woman, a shaming environment, we've had those, and it will happen. There are bullies, right? But I went immediately to the top person that I had access to on the client side and said, this is not acceptable. I want to put you on notice that this happened, and this is not an environment where you're going to get our best work. So it's not good for anybody. And they jumped right onto it. And so I think the more immediately it's confronted, the more power you have in the situation.
Teal, that actually, that stimulated or sparked something for me, if I might speak to this. I think you brought up something interesting, that it's not necessarily just men, but sometimes we as women can get very much bullied by other women, right? And so whether it's a gross example of someone being really lewd to you on a job site, which would most likely be a man, or it's someone in your own office shaming you and bullying you in front of other staff, those are things that I think it's shocking at first and it's hard to even know how to react, but the more that we all work on our own confidence and self-esteem and holding boundaries. Boundaries aren't just about work-life balance, they're about our own value in the workplace. And holding a firm boundary that we have value and that we will not tolerate being treated like that. As hard as it is when in many cases, and I'll just say this is the way I was raised, I won't speak for anybody else, but you look to other people to tell you you're worth something. And it's incumbent on us to start to find our own value internally so that when someone challenges that or shames us or bullies us or catcalls us in a way that's not acceptable, sometimes you may feel flattered and that's okay. But to have self-worth, to be able to stand up also for ourselves and say, I will not stand to be treated that way and that's inappropriate. That's totally valuable too, and that becomes a place where we hold power, and the more we hold power, and I think we've talked about this, Miranda, the more that we hold power, the less likely people are to harass and bully us. So it's this beautiful kind of ascending cycle. Can I tell you guys one funny story? This is lighthearted, but this is the cat calls on a job site. When I was in my 20s and I was working as an architect, I lived in a small town on the western slope where I rode my bike to and from work. And I happened to be, I'd gone home for lunch, and so I was riding back on my blue Schwinn Collegiate Cruiser. I think I'd taken the streamers off the handlebars by that point. I was probably wearing a skirt and heels, and I rode past a medical office where I was the architect for an expansion. And all the guys on the roof, they catcalled and whistled and hooted and hollered, and I rode by just laughing, like, y'all are not going to enjoy it when I show up in my hard hat in 2 hours. Sure enough. I rode my bike back to the job site 2 hours later with my hard hat and my plans, and every man on that job site scattered like a cockroach in the light of day. There was no one on that job site. And I just laughed about it. So, you know, sometimes there's humor in the things that are also less significant. And having a sense of humor, knowing when to stand our boundaries, but also having a sense of humor can save us a lot of heartache.
Thank you, Lisa. That's a wonderful, lighthearted note to end on, actually. Joy and Amy, thank you so much for hosting us tonight and making this possible. Thank you so much to our panel. By the way, this was recorded. That's your disclosure. We'll be sending a recap, really, just so you can all remember what you learned tonight. And hopefully you'll join us April 19th for our next event. Please reach out to a board member if you're interested in the chapter, the Denver chapter, if you're interested in helping organize these events, fund them, you can host them, be involved on many levels. So thank you all for being here and enjoy the rest of your night.